To this very timely Let's Talk About, because we're in the middle of English Wine Week, and we're delighted to welcome Sam Linter, who's the MD and head winemaker at Bolney Wine Estate in Sussex. And Sam is also a board member, director of Wine GB, which is the trade body for the wines of Great Britain. Bolney is just a prime example of a sustainable, long established English wine business. It was set up by Sam's parents very nearly 50 years ago. And since then, it's been at the forefront, or sometimes even in front of the forefront, of English wines. Initially, obviously, all still, but it's moved into sparkling as sparkling has become more important. But what's great about Bolney is that it still has a wonderful range of still wines, a lot of emphasis on still wines, and has done a lot of work with red wines, which is unusual in the UK. It does lots of other things, excellent on wine tourism. And during the COVID lockdown, it's done wonderful things with its local community. So over to Sam to tell us about English still wine particularly. Oh, and the other thing I meant to say is that we feel as a circle that English still wine isn't well enough known among our members and wider afield. So we've been planning a masterclass seminar on English still wine for probably November. Whether it's going to happen and in quite what form it's going to happen, we don't know at the moment, but we will keep everybody informed. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Liz. Good afternoon, everybody. That sounds really interesting. I like the idea of an English still wine seminar. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. I was just thinking I couldn't hear anybody, and then you're all nodding because you're all muted, so sorry about that. So yes, I'm going to talk about English still wines, and thank you for the introduction. I'll talk a little bit about Bolney's history as well as we go through. But to start off with, we'll just do the just talk through some points I made on that slideshow. So I'm just getting this set up. I'm not very good at technology, so I'm hoping this is going to work. So bear with me. So Bolney Wine Estate, as Liz said, we've been around now for 48 years. My parents started in 1972. And I'll talk a little bit about history in a moment, but English still wines in general. So it's had a very interesting history, English still wine, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, there's been a potted history of wine production in the UK since Roman times, up until really the First World War. And from the 1920s-ish onwards, there really wasn't anything made in this country. There was some evidence of it being made before then, but in very little bits. So the renaissance, I suppose, or the start really of the English wine industry came really from two people, a person called Sir Guy Salisbury Jones, but mostly from a gentleman called Ray Barrington Brock, who set up the Hambledon Research Station. And he set up this research station, and he was experimenting and researching what vines could be grown in the UK. And he actually was very successful with Pinot Noir. This got a little bit of interest going with people in the sort of late 50s, early 60s, sort of around that sort of time. And people started thinking, oh, maybe I could plant some vines in my very large back garden, and people put a few rows in, a few rows there. And then there were some bigger producers that came along and thought, oh, maybe we'll plant a vineyard up, and that's what people did. Nobody knew what to do. There was no history of making wine in England. There's no history of growing vines in England. Nobody knew what the vines should really be, other than the research that came from Ray Barrington Brock. So somebody decided to go to Germany. The idea being Germany has the closest climate to us, therefore what they're growing in Germany would be really good for the UK. Actually, England has, as we all know, those of us that live here, it has quite a damp climate. We get quite a lot of rain. So they went to Germany, came back, and everybody planted Müller-Thurgau. It's one of the workhorse grapes in Liefravilch, which was very popular over here. So we planted it, and that's what England did, and it planted other Germanic white varieties. It started with white. Nobody ever even considered anything else. And we really had a disaster. We have to be honest. The damp climate didn't suit that variety very well, and we got mildew, downy and powdery regularly. and the subsequent cause of botrytis on the grapes. Issue with that was, in those days, nobody actually knew that we needed good quality grapes to make good quality wine. So they'd happily go along and pick all the grapes, good or bad. They went into the press and the resulting wines weren't very good. And certainly that was exactly what my parents did in the early 70s as well. They had Muller, they had rotten Muller, and they made wine from it because they didn't know any better. And I think really we started really poorly. And quite rightly, the industry, a tiny baby industry as it was at that time, quite rightly had a very poor reputation because of that. So time went on, and my parents actually, and I'll talk about this a bit later, actually did experimental planting in the 80s, and I know some other vineyards did, to see, actually, okay, this isn't growing very well. We've invested in planting vines. Is there something we can do better? In the meantime, we were also learning actually how to grow Muller Thurgau successfully in the UK. And we actually did do it, but by that time things had moved on. But if you move forward from there, nothing really happened. Nothing really gained any traction. People were learning better about running vineyards, canopy management. They were looking at different varieties, but it was all done on a very small scale. It was a very small industry at that time, and nobody was really investing money in it. A few were, but not on a major scale. And then came along Night Timber, Stuart and Sandy Moss, and the Roberts family from Ridgeview around the late 80s and early 90s. These guys went to France. They got some French consultants to come in and talk to them about planting vines in the UK to make traditional method sparkling wine. And they invested money in it. And it was really the Mosses from Night Timber, as we all know, who did that first. And they had a consultant called Jean-Manuel Jacquinot, who runs the Champagne House out of a winery out of Epinay. And he came round and he looked around and he found what he thought was the best site at the time. And it was this beautiful sandstone ridge that he found for Night Timber with south-facing slopes. And they planted and they started winning serious awards. They won gold medals, international trophies. They did really, really well with their first wine, which was 92. I believe. I'm talking from memory here, so I hope I'm correct in saying that. And suddenly, everybody started thinking, oh, that's interesting. Somebody's made a really good sparkling wine from England. And Ridgeview followed very close behind and started releasing wines that started to win awards as well. And this was the first time we'd won awards before, but it's the first time you really saw a significant amount of international awards being won by wines being made, multiple awards being made by wines in England or an English producer. And that really then made other people sit up and think, maybe that's what we can do in the UK. We're not doing so well with the still wines. We can do sparkling wine. Then other people came in with money and invested in vineyards. And as you see now, you get millionaires and billionaires actually are now investing in the UK. But that started happening slowly from the Night Timber success. And I think Stephen Skelton coined the phrase Night Timber effect or something like that, but I might be misquoting him. But it was amazing how that happened. And suddenly it all became about sparkling wine. Nobody considered still wine. And that's where the industry went. That's where the investment went. Plumpton College, which is the only college that was teaching viticulture and oenology, started talking sparkling wine production. When I went to Plumpton in the 90s, they didn't do sparkling wine, they didn't do red wine, it was just still wine. But they started to invest in that as well. So things really changed, and it was very much a sparkling emphasis. In the meantime, there are those of us who had been still wine producers. That's where we started. That was our heritage, who just carried on in the background, slowly plodding along, thinking, okay, we've got to find the right varieties. Let's see what we can do. And by doing that, we learned the right varieties to grow in the UK. And we learned how to do it really well, how to do the canopy management, what sites are the best sites to grow on. And we were doing that quite quietly behind the scenes. And this is what we learnt. We learnt what varieties would go. And we were growing, we tried more German varieties. So if you go to the bottom of the slide here, you can see I've described them as the more offbeat varieties of Rondo, Dornfeld, Ortega, Reichensteiner, Madeleine Angevin, Huxelraber, and many others. That's just a sample of the few that were being planted. They worked. They really did work. they grew, we kept them relatively disease-free, they ripened to varying degrees. Ortega is a real standout actually for ripening in the UK, and it's often used for a sweet wine. It does really well. And actually the still producers were really learning here that you can actually really ripen still grapes and you can keep them healthy, and it doesn't need to go into sparkling wine which needs more acidity, because actually there are varieties out there that will grow with low acidity. And that was really key. That was a very key thing that happened, that we started to learn. It moved on from then, understanding that we made a Rondo Dornfelder blend, which we called Dark Harvest, back in the early 2000s. And but actually putting Rondo Dornfelder or anything like that on the labels, general public didn't understand what they were. And English wine was a hard sell anyway, let's face it. So trying to sell something that's already a hard sell with a great variety that the general public had never heard of and couldn't even understand didn't work. So we all started looking at what varieties we could do that are more internationally recognised, that people could recognise and go, oh, I know Pinot Noir, I know what Pinot Noir is. And that's what we started planting. So if I go back to the 1980s, where my parents planted their experimental plot, they actually planted in that experimental plot Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, they planted Dornfelder, Rondo, Zweigel, Trabe, Schoenberger, Wurzer, Kerner. They had, and Duncanfield as well was the other one I've forgotten. They planted all of these, but the two standouts were Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, because we suddenly discovered we could grow them on our site, and they actually grew really well. And that made us really think about what we could make from those wines. Now, Bolney is on a sandstone ridge, the same sandstone ridge that Night Timber sits on. We didn't know that at the time, but we were very lucky. So looking at these varieties, we actually have planted all of these ourselves as well, but you'll see a lot of the still producers. Bacchus has now become very, very big in England for still wine. Some people call it the English Sauvignon Blanc. It has some similar characteristics to that, but I think it's so much more than that. Pinot Noir, we have lots of Pinot Noir grown in the UK. You have all the Champagne clones, you have all the Burgundy clones, and you have something called Pinot Noir Precoce, which is used a lot for Pinot Noir red wine. But people like us have actually learning how to grow and ripen Pinot Noir Burgundy clones as well, and that's what we're doing. Pinot Gris is being grown quite a lot, and now as the summers are getting warmer, we're actually able to grow some Chardonnay clones to ripen to make a still wine, and that's really exciting actually. And actually people are starting to make still wine out of Pinot Meunier. There's been a rosé and a red now. In fact, I think Hush Heath were very successful, winning a major award last year with a Pinot Meunier red wine that they made. So I think what's really sparking the interest in English still wines is the fact that whilst the sparkling success was happening, we were doing all of this. We were looking at the right varieties, we were doing the right canopy management, we were looking at the right sites and planting the still wines on the right sites. And there are enough producers that cared enough about wanting to make a really good still wine and not to be pulled along with the sparkling wine success that dug their heels in and said, no, we're going to get this right. And I think that's what's happened, is that some really beautiful, clean, elegant, fresh, characterful English whites are coming, and reds and rosés are coming out from these varieties now. And they're really, really nice, pretty wines. And they're slightly lower in alcohol as well, as English wine is, as we know. Don't get quite the sugar that you do in other countries. And I think that's what's happened. It happened very slowly, very quietly. And the wine started coming out and people have slowly started to notice, and I think people are now seeing an interest in them. If you'd have gone back 10, 15 years, the wines wouldn't have been anywhere near as good. So I think sparkling wine success has woken up the world to the ability to make really good sparkling wine in England, and now the still wines are beginning to catch up. Not there yet, we've still got a long way to go, but still wines are catching up in terms of making good, solid, clean, attractive wines. So that's where I think that's come from. So that would be my take on that. I mean, just a little bit of a rough Bolney history, I've explained a little bit, but just to say where we've gone and how we've evolved, and shows a little bit how that evolution has come through. So as I said, we started in 1972. We were one of the first we think one of the first six of the first commercial producers at the time to plant, and there's not many of us left. Biddenden are the other name that I always remember. Breaky Bottom still around, planted similar sort of time. Biddenden in 68, Breaky Bottom in 73. So we all started around the same time. And I joined working here. It's a family business. My parents started up the business and I started in 95. So it actually makes me feel quite old because that was 25 years ago and it doesn't feel that long ago at all. But we were really lucky. That's when night timber was really having its success around that time. And they were very open to talking to us. So I went over and talked to them and got to know Stuart and Sandy Moss really well and Mike Roberts really well at Ridgeview to talk about what we're doing. And in 2000, we had an opportunity to buy some more land. And the land we bought was on the same sandstone ridge I've just mentioned that night timber was on. So we were actually able to get off of the clay soils my parents had first planted on and onto the sandstone south-facing slopes. And for Bolney, made the difference. We suddenly had the vines on the right soils and the right aspect, and we started producing much better grapes. We were first listed in 2007 in Waitrose, and we're still there with 2 still wines, 1 white, 1 red, and that red wine that we made has stayed in Waitrose for all of that time. And we went on from there. We had to build a new winery, we built a new warehouse, and in 2012 we finally won our first really major international award, which is in the International Wine and Spirits Competition, the UK Wine Producer of the Year, which was great. In 2015, we got a still wine served in Wimbledon, which is our Pinot Gris. And we went through to 17, where we actually won another UK Wine Producer of the Year award, again with the still wine. So we've been slowly picking up major awards from the back of our still wines, not our sparkling wines. And we put a lot of effort into our still wines. We were winning gold medals for our Pinot Noir by this time as well. And going through to 2019, I'm just skipping through this to not to spend too much time on it. We merged with another vineyard. So another vineyard planted in 2017, 2 miles away from us, again on the same sandstone soil and slope that we have, and they planted for us. They planted all the varieties we wanted: Bacchus, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Burgundy and Champagne clones of Pinot Noir. And that was very exciting for us because it took us from being a producer around 100,000 potential of 80 to 100,000 bottles a year, with buying grapes in from other local vineyards, to a producer that could do up to 250,000 bottles just from our own sites, all based within 2 miles of Bolney itself, so in the centre of Sussex. And then we had to build a new winery again. So that's the second new winery we built in the space of 15 years. That's kept us quite busy. I don't think I want to build another one, but this one's 3 times the size, and we can produce up to 350,000 bottles from that winery. Worldwide terms, I understand 350,000 is quite small. UK terms, that makes us quite large. We're actually the 10th largest producer in the UK. And actually, we just want to be boutique. We want to do what we do really well. So we're not really looking to get any bit bigger than that. We make gin out of the wine that we press out after we've taken the cut for the still wines and the sparkling wines. We then press the rest of the juice out, we ferment it, and we use that to distill into a gin. And we have some fun with that. So over the last 50 years, as I say, we planted Müller Thurgau, mid-80s, we did the experimental varieties. But for me, what was really key for Bolney Wine Estate, what we really wanted to achieve, was making red wine. In the 90s, sparkling wine was taken off. People realised we could make still wine. It wasn't as good as it could be, but we were getting better at it. And everybody said there's no way we could ever grow red grapes successfully to make a red wine in the UK. But then people told my parents you couldn't make wine in the UK in the late 60s and 70s when they came up with the idea of doing that. So I thought, well, okay, true Bolney style, true Bolney family style. If people say you can't do it, and we have proved we can do that, we can prove we can do this. So we started making red wine, and I released the first red wine I actually made in 1998, which was from the German varieties Rondo and Dornfelder, and it was a semi-decent red wine. And I realised that, okay, we can do this, but we've got to do it an awful lot better. So I started really working on it. And also started looking at that Pinot Noir Burgundy clone my parents had grown, and thought, do you know what? Pinot Noir is a more elegant wine. They ripen. Let's see what we can do. And then I really looked at Pinot Noir. So we've really heroed Pinot Noir as a red variety in the UK. It's lighter than in body and in colour that you get from France, our closest neighbours, from wine making. But it still makes a very pretty, very characterful Pinot Noir. And over the 20 years that we've been making it, we've developed it to the point where we've been winning gold medals in international competitions with it. So we're really excited. We actually had it tasted, aligned on the One Show in 2010. For those of you that are from the UK, the One Show is shown on BBC One at 7 o'clock most evenings of the week, and it comes on after the news. And it's a very well watched programme. They decided in English Wine Week, and the reason I'm mentioning it now because we're in English Wine Week and it's topical, they decided that it'd be a really good idea to do a blind tasting for an English red, an English sparkling and an English white wine against wines from around the world. They chose us because we just recently won a gold medal with this wine, and they looked at the two other Burgundies. We actually came out top in the blind tasting. And Jay Renner, who was the judge and the food critic for the One Show, actually said, if I don't recognise the English one, I'll eat my hat. He hasn't eaten his hat, but that's for us. That was really exciting. For us, that was a really pinnacle moment in our development. That actually, yes, we'd won medals for the red wine, but actually had come out in a blind tasting and it actually beaten a couple of Burgundies. Now they weren't the best Burgundies in the world. I'll hold my hands to that. But it proved that it sat there in that quality level for us. That was really exciting. And as I mentioned before, we won UK Wine Producer of the Year in 2012. One of the other things we've really looked at doing at Bolney, and I think this is another reason that's been really helpful to the English British wine industry, that's really helped us really get our name out there and really talk about the wines we make, is tourism. Certainly within Britain itself, tourism is really important, and we have been doing this for 20 years. We've done tours around the vineyard, we've done wine tastings, and we've had events here because we've always wanted to bring people in, and we've always wanted to say, you don't have to go to Europe, you don't have to go to anywhere else in the rest of the world. You can now come and visit a vineyard in England and we can tell you about what we do. And we found it was really, really important to actually educate people about what we do in the UK, all the mistakes we made. And we felt it was really important. We always held our hands up. We live still with too recent a history of having made very bad wines and then some okay wines. It's only more recently we've been making really good wines. And I think it's really important that we always acknowledge that. We always acknowledge where we've come from, and be open and honest about it, and share the journey with people of why it was so bad, like I've done a little bit with you guys today, and why that didn't work, but how we worked really hard, as does a lot of other wine regions around the world, work really, really hard to improve what we do and to actually learn our craft and learn how to look after the vines in our vineyard, how to get the most from them, how to keep them clean, how to keep them disease-free, how to help the grapes ripen. And as we all know, if we can't get that right in the vineyard, it doesn't matter what we do in the winery. The winery is just a caretaker of grapes, I always say. You have to get it right in the vineyard. But none of us understood that when we first started. So we feel doing the tours and having people coming to our vineyard gives us an opportunity to share that story, to share that development, and to actually show what we have achieved over that period of time. So I'd almost like somebody who'd been on a tour with us 10, 20 years ago to come and do a tour again now, and just to see how much that we've actually evolved and we've actually developed, because they'd be absolutely surprised, I'm sure, by the changes that we've had. So that's why we do it. And that's why I'm really pleased I'm talking to all of you today. This is coming towards the end of English Wine Week, finishes tomorrow. But that's a really important date in our UK calendar. It gives the whole industry a chance to share with everybody, with the trade, with people like yourselves, with wine writers, and with general public, what we do. And a lot of vineyards get involved with doing a series of events throughout this week to just try and promote it on a national scale. I think English Wine Week's been changed. It's not normally in this week. It's normally at the very end of May. So it just feels a bit weird being at the end of June. We're a month later, but because of COVID and the lockdown, it was decided to move it back a bit and give everybody a chance to get back on their feet. And during this week, we as example have actually run a series of virtual tastings since last Saturday through to this Saturday. And every night we've done a different Bolney wine, of which we've done reds as well. We actually did, I believe, our sparkling red is going to be tonight, and we have a sparkling red we make, which is a little bit bonkers, I know, but we decided as we make sparkling wine, and we make sparkling wine here as well by the traditional method, as we made sparkling wine, but we really heroed red wine here at Bolney, but we should do a sparkling red, so we do that. It's a little bit of a Marmite wine. Some people love it, some people hate it, but it's got a following. We make a few thousand bottles a year because people just want to buy it, so we just carry on doing it for that, and it's a bit of fun. It goes very well with barbecues if you lightly chill it. So that's what we do here at Bolney. And just as the last picture here, I thought you might like to see some food. You might not be hungry if you've just eaten your lunch, but this is what we do with our tourism here. And we do little plates of food, we do afternoon tea. Everything we do here, as in any wine tourism region around the world, is always paired with wine. So the wine always comes first. So we look at what, with our wines, what pairs with other types of food as well. We work really hard on that. But so we have a cafe on site, we do tours, we do events, we do quite a lot. It keeps us very busy. And that's us. But just what I wanted to share just before I finish is Bolney Heroes, Pinot Noir Heroes red wine. We will always be still wine producers at heart. We love our sparkling wines. We make really good sparkling wines. We've won medals and gold medals and trophies for our sparkling wine. But at heart, we'll always hero the still, because that's our heritage and that's where we started. And we'll always hero Pinot Noir because that's our hero wine, if you like, because we were the first ones to really go for making a Pinot Noir red wine, and we love it, and we're so pleased we've got to, and we hope that we'll keep on improving that wine over the years as well. Nothing in England has stopped being evolved. There's still wine varieties we make now will never stay as that. They will be a moving feast, and all of the English wine producers are very much pioneers and innovators. We know there's more we can learn. We're still such a young industry. We know there's so much more we can do, so much more we can learn, that we've not stopped here. This is not the end of our story. This won't be what we'll be doing for the rest of the next century. You'll look at us and again in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and we'll evolve and we'll have done something else, and we will just keep on doing that just because that's who we are. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's turn this off.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah. Right, back to the big screen. We've got quite a few comments and questions, so let's get on with it, Sam. Where's the chat box now? I just want to go to the top. So Vivian's finished her lunch.
Well done.
And there's a comment here from Sue to say that Simpsons are trialing a white Pinot Meunier and they've had lots of volume. Sue, do you want to tell us about that? No, unmute.
I'm just doing it, yeah. We tasted it with Charles at the Kent Garden of England Festival last year, because obviously Kent has its own group, same as Sussex do and same as Surrey do, where they market their wines. And it's just very interesting. I mean, it's not on the market yet, I don't think, but it had, that sort of waxy volume that you get from Pinot Meunier. So, yeah. I mean, they already do a Chardonnay, as you know.
They
do. Yeah, their wines are good. I mean, they've got the experience, same as you. They took experience from France to start with, because they've got the place in Languedoc. So it was interesting what you were saying about how things first started, because I think it's very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And I had heard they were making a white from Pinot Meunier, so I'm actually quite intrigued.
It's fascinating. I mean, it's got that, when you have a champagne which is mostly Pinot Meunier rather than being more Pinot Noir, it's just got that waxy volume behind it, when you're tasting it. And I really liked it, because I'm not a huge fan of the sharpness of Sauvignon Blanc and things like that. So I like that roundness, that waxiness, but No, it's really, if you can get your paws on some, it's definitely worth trying to taste it.
Well, I just saw Liz flash up to say that it's available in Waitrose, so I'll actually have to go.
This was about a
go
year
get some.
ago, so yeah.
But that's exciting to me, because it's one thing that England doesn't do at the moment is a more rounded white wine. Bacchus is beginning to give us that, but we don't really have that. So to find a way of doing that, that's actually quite exciting, especially if you use it as a blending component in something else. It could be something that just adds more to another wine as well.
Yeah.
So on its own or as blending. Oh, it's making me think about what I could do with that now.
No, but it was great because yes, exactly. I mean, I don't really like I live in France anyway, but I don't like the sharpness sometimes of the English wines. I mean, some of the Bittendon ones are nice. We mentioned Ortega. They do a fabulous Gamay, which is up there with Beaujolais Cru, which is very, very good. They're doing good stuff as well.
Yeah, they are.
But I mean, as you know, they focus a lot on their ciders because they make for Chapel Down.
They do.
They make all the curious stuff, as you know. And it's a son that's very interested in doing interesting wine things. A bit like when you came in and you decided that you were going to do different things. He's a few years behind, but it's similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating talk as well. It was great.
Thank you.
I've been to Bolney a few times.
I'm with you on that Pinot Meunier. It was one of my picks for the AWE's Awesome Wines last year. And I actually spoke to Ruth Simpson and it's Charles, is it?
Charles, it's Charles I spoke to, yeah.
Because, and he said that waxy style you're talking about is because he's so experienced in producing Roussanne down in the Languedoc.
Exactly, because of Languedoc. Yeah, because of Languedoc. Yeah.
And so he knows how to coax that sort of style.
That's really interesting because it really does have that. It's got that Languedoc Roussanne feel to it, that waxiness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. It's interesting.
I'm going to have to go and talk to Charles now.
You'll have to, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feedback for next year's wine week, Sam.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And
something different.
Dominic, you're unmuted. Can you ask Sam your question?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That was really interesting. I mean, obviously, I see you a lot in WineGB, and I know bits of the story, but it was really good to hear the whole thing today. Thank you for that. So my questions really relate to varieties. And, this question of, do we actually want a hero variety at this point for English still wine, either red or white? Obviously, you're championing Pinot Noir at Bolney, but for the industry as a whole, do you think we should be looking to find something now, or just leave it and let things emerge in due course? And then my other question was very specifically about the green sand and which varieties you think really get the advantage from being on the green sand, because more often you hear about the Chardonnay on the chalk, but what do you think about the green sand? What does best on that?
So the green sand is, I'll do that one first. The green sand is warmer. It creates a warmer environment in the vineyard than chalk does. I like what it does with Chardonnay. It brings in a slightly riper flavor, character grape from the green sand, which I really like. But for me, if you're talking about varieties, I would say with what we grow on the green sand, the ones that really stand out from having grown on clay as well would be the Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay. Really, Bacchus is quite different. I think our Bacchus on our green sand is quite different from some of the other Bacchus. I like to say Bacchi, which I know is not correct. In England, there's quite a lot of them now, and there's a big range, as we know, of different styles. And I find ours comes out quite a little bit different from most others, which I find quite intriguing. Which I think must come from the fact that we're growing that on green sand, because I'm not sure so many actually are on the same soil type as we are, other than some of the sparkling producers. But we certainly get I would say a slightly more linear Bacchus than some of the others. Some of the others get much more of towards the Sauvignon characteristics. I don't really want to say that because it's not Sauvignon Blanc and it's only similar to it. It's not the same. But some of the others are much fuller, more full on of those kind of characteristics, as ours tends to still stay more in the apple, the floral characters which we get from that, which I quite like. But then that's very much Bolney style, because that's what we have from our soil. So I'd say and Pinot Gris. I think Pinot Gris gets that lovely kind of pear spice, and again maybe white jasmine or something like that would be what I describe a Pinot Gris as. And I think that does so much better on the green sand than it has done when we grew that on clay soils, for instance. That's quite interesting. I've forgotten your first question. Oh, Hero wines. That's a really difficult one. I think having a hero wine is always helpful because for public who don't know a lot about wine, having something they can say, yeah, do you know what? I know about Claret for Bordeaux. I know about Burgundy and it's Pinot Noir, and they get it, and they get it as a style. It's helpful. But I think as far as England's concerned, yes, I think hero varieties are good. But as I said earlier, we're still evolving. It's a moving picture, isn't it? And I don't think it should stop. And I think we've done that quite successfully for quite a long time. So to stop that would be such a shame, because I think when you stop innovation, you don't move forward with your wine styles. And I think wine should always move forward and evolve. Personally, that's my own opinion. So to settle on one or two heroes, so if Bacchus becomes something everybody settles on, I think that would, for still whites, I think that's a great shame, because I think there's more we can do with still whites. And if everybody settled on Pinot Noir, as much as I love it and we really work on it, I think that would be a shame, because I think we'll discover there's other varieties out there that we haven't even trialed yet, or that our climate's changing, that we still need to try, that could do some really wonderful wines as well. So I think possibly I'd err away from heroes, that people say, look, we'll just stick to one or two, and say, let's keep it more open. Let's see what else we can do. That's what we've been doing for the last, 40, 50 years. So let's carry on doing it.
Thank you.
Right, next up, Mariella, all the way from the Netherlands.
All the way, just across from the water. Hello, everyone. Sam, I had a question for you about the varieties also. Like you in the Netherlands in 1970, we started with Muller-Thurgau, which is hardly there anymore.
Yep.
But apart from the classical varieties, we mostly concentrated on the younger interspecific crossings like Solaris, Johanniter, Sauvigny Gris. I don't see any of them in your list. Is there a reason? Is that used at all in the UK, or?
I don't know about the other. I don't know about the other two. But Solaris is definitely grown in the UK. I have never seen a wine or heard of a wine of note that's come from it. So I think we've tended to have more success with the other varieties that I've mentioned than we've actually had with Solaris. But I mean, it grows. It's a good producer of quantity. I think in the UK less so of quality. And I think one of the really key things that's also helped English still wine improve is, in the early days, it was all about, let's get volume of wine produced. Let's try and max the vines out to produce the maximum amount of volume of grapes, and because we need to sell wines cheaply. What some of us realised was actually we can't do that because we're just not getting good enough quality. Let's chuck that out with the bathwater, and then let's start again and think about how do we make as good a quality still wine as we can, that we can charge more for, and therefore we don't have to max out the vines, and we can keep a lower quantity of grapes being, and that's how we get the ripeness. And what was happening before, we were trying to get too many grapes off each vine, we couldn't get the ripeness, we were making so despite the disease issues, we also made very thin and very acidic wines as well. And so that's been a big learning curve to not do that, and to do this. So Solaris is a big producer, I believe. I know from we don't have it, but producers I've spoken to who do have it say yes, you get a really good crop of it. But I've not come across, and I might be wrong, and Dominic, you might have come across one, but I certainly haven't come across a wine of note from that variety. That's not to say there aren't crossed varieties in the UK. I mean, Rondo was one that haven't been successful or won't be successful in the future. I know there are producers experimenting with different varieties, as well as things like Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc as well as being experimented with at the moment. No idea where that's going to go, but it's, yeah, just keep experimenting, I'd say. But no, we don't really.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Mariella. Meg, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Sam. This has been really great. I have yet to taste English still wine. I have tasted some sparkling. They basically are not, they don't make it over here to the United States. I was wondering about pricing. What are the prices in the UK of your still wines? And how do you think as a business person about pricing and the message that it sends to the consumer who is contemplating an English wine or a European import?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one for English wine, because we don't, sparkling wines, that sorted itself out now, but for still wines, we don't have the reputation. So when you're trying to charge anything between 15 and 20 pounds a bottle, that becomes quite tricky, because it's like the people have got to take a punt on that being a really nice wine without the reputation to back it up. We do sell wines for between 15 and 20 pound a bottle, and they'll be our estate wines. So our premium stills, which is our estate Bacchus, Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. Everything else we have either at 15 or sub 15. So I think you'll find in the UK, you'll see still, I mean, there's the anomalies, of course, on either end, but ignoring those, normally you'd see kind of like £9 through to £20 would really where most of them sit, but there are some a little bit cheaper, some a lot more expensive as well. It's hard. So we as a business, we took the decision that we knew we needed to be as premium as we could. We knew we need the margins are, because we have such small amounts of volume coming from the vines, if we would need to get them ripe. So you're talking 2 to 3 tons an acre. It's quite tiny. So in order to make that profitable, you have to charge more, which means you need to make those wines really well. You need to get those grapes really, really ripe. But we also recognise that asking somebody to pay more than £15 a bottle on an English wine that they've never heard of before is not going to happen. So we started making wines at the £10 mark. And we actually found by starting to do that, people did actually start taking a punt at that point. So that was quite interesting, because most, there's a lot of evidence out there to say people probably spend sub £10 a bottle in the UK's between the 5 and 10 seems to be where the price points are really most heavily spent. But we do find people will take a punt. So that seems to work for us, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Well, Meg, I'm pleased to hear that I'm not the only one that hasn't had an English still wine. I think in South Africa, the only person who's probably had one is Angela Lloyd. So we look forward to having it in South Africa.
We'll have to get you some wine over there.
Liz, you have a question for Sam?
Yes, I'm wondering, as far as still wine producers are concerned, climate change is making ripening much easier, but there are still really bad vintages where the sparkling wine producers probably can get by. They can use less ripe grapes. They've got more reserve wines that they can go back on. How is the UK industry going to make still wine really sustainable?
Really good question, and it's one that we talk about a lot here at Bolney. For us, the key to that is that we've been building stock over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, where we're looking at having at least, normally still whites and rosés in the UK, you make it and you bottle it in the spring, and then you sold it by the end of the year, and you're back around again. The stock holdings are quite low. What we've started to do now is to build up our stock holdings so that we do have we're getting there, but we've got 1 to 2 years worth of still wines in stock. So if there is a really bad vintage or we lose a vintage, then we don't have to worry. We don't have to put ourselves under the pressure, which we did in the past. Said, well, we've got to make wine anyway because we've got to sell it. And this is, again, this comes back to the whole quality issue, which is where I think English still wine really struggled, is that we were making wine out of bad grapes, or the grapes we shouldn't be using. I think a lot of us have learned not to do that now, and that's one way of doing it. Another way is we make a sparkling wine called Bolney Bubbly. It's incredibly popular. It sells at £22 a bottle. It's a traditional method, but we use our other varieties in it. So it has some Chardonnay, has a little bit of Bacchus, and it has our heritage varieties often has a bit of Millerthurgau and varieties like that. So it is a blend, and every year the blend is slightly different, and we're open and honest about that. And we like that because it just makes it slightly different. But it is a style that people recognise, and that gives you an opportunity each year that if the wines are slightly not quite ripe enough for the still wine as we would like to make them, that we can say, well, actually, we can make that into our sparkling. And we have done that before. Even our Pinot Gris occasionally has gone into there. So that gives you a flexibility too. So being a sparkling and a still producer, you do have a little bit more flexibility. And I think that's quite needed in the UK.
Great, thank you.
Right, next from Carol.
Hello, Sam. Yeah, this is probably more as your role as director of Wine GB. The debate about PDO, regionality, etc., etc. Is it too much of a problem at the moment, and we should still be focusing more on the quality of the wines before we get to that stage, or how do you feel about it?
So you mean you're asking about regional PDOs? Yeah. Yeah. About 5 years ago, I felt differently. 5 years ago, I was persuaded that the Sussex PDO was a really good idea, and I actually got behind that. Within a 6 to 12 months of getting behind it, I realised that actually that was a mistake. And I think I'm part of the Sussex Wineries group who managed the Sussex PDO, and quite frankly, we've not made one because I like the fact it's there. I was very much part of helping it come into creation, but actually thinking about it since, I think it's more important, and this is what Sussex Wineries and the other regional groups are doing. It's actually more important to shout about your region and to market it in that way than it is trying to pinpoint what the quality from a region should be. And actually, England's not a particularly big country. The south of England, where the majority of wine's made, is not a big area in world terms. So to get the huge differences or the big differences you'd be looking for to say, well, that really picks out in a regional PDO is actually quite difficult. So I'm not even sure, will we ever get there? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced there's enough regional differences to be able to say, yes, you can tell that comes from here rather than here, because I just don't think I think we're all still too close together, if that makes sense. Okay, maybe the vineyards in Yorkshire and the vineyards in Sussex, you can see the differences there. But when you think the majority of vineyards around Kent, Surrey, Sussex and Hampshire, we're all in that southeast corner, and Essex, of course, we're all, the soils, climates are all too similar really for enough differences to pick out regional PDOs, would be my opinion. And I'm not sure at the moment where we really need to get everybody behind English wine that it's actually helpful to confuse that message and that brand building, that generic brand building with then sub-regions within it. If that makes sense. Yeah, so a bit of a mixed message there, because I've been part of both sides.
Well, I think it's like experimenting with vines. You have a right to change your mind as things evolve, and that's the way it is. And I do like, as you say, the regionality of the collective help amongst wineries in marketing and putting that down, I think is great. And I think
makes sense.
I'm based on the edge of Kent, so that's good, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, well, they do a really good job actually. The Wine Gardens of England are a really, really good group.
Yeah, they're doing well.
They are. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I can see Ian is talking about a wine that sounds very much like it's coming from a New Zealand producer,
Winberry.
Winberry, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're in Norfolk. Are they in Norfolk? I think so. Yeah. They're an amazing producer. They won the Decanter Award of the best, was it value wine in the world or something like that? It was incredible what they did. Yeah, really big.
Well, I'll have to try that when I'm back in England. Are there any other questions? Because so far that is the lot. Thanks, Sam. Thank you very much.
You.
For me in particular, it was very enlightening because I've only ever known more about the sparkling wines and still wines. So I shall come with Vivian. She says she did a visit 10 years ago. So when she goes again, I'll come for my first visit.
Perfect. It'd be really lovely to see you here, Winnie. Everybody's always welcome to Bolney. But yeah, if you get to come, let me know. I'll show you around.
Thank you very much. And everybody, have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next Friday at the same time.